Well, the 2023 Toronto Pro did prove to be quite the controversial show. Of course, that has a lot to do with the winner of the show, Iain Valliere. Iain seems to bring controversy wherever he goes due to his divisive physique. He does have a lot of pro wins, but just about every one of those wins, including some of his lower placings, have been criticized heavily by a large portion of fans. And Toronto was no different. That's why I really wanted to do a pose-by-pose analysis for this show for you guys today. Today we'll be comparing Hassan Mustafa, who placed second at the show, against Iain. By most fans' estimation, Hassan was robbed of the show, so let's take a deep dive into this comparison to see if that claim holds up. I will also be ranking these guys too, just as if I were a judge using the IFBB point system. And if you don't know how that works, I'll basically be ranking each guy in each pose from first to last and rewarding points based on the placing I give them. Now we only have two guys in this comparison, we don't have an entire lineup really, so each guy will get either 1 point if I think they are winning the pose, 1 point for first place, or 2 points if I think they place last in the pose, 2 points for second place. And at the end, when I tally up the final score, the athlete with the lowest score will be the winner, at least in the mandatory poses, which is really the only thing I can judge semi-fairly. I'm not going to judge the posing routines. I can't see how the athletes were in between poses and their transitions. I can't really do any of that just from photos. And I completely understand I'm not there in person, I wasn't there in person, and again, these are just photos. I completely understand that. Don't give me hate in the comments. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into it, starting with the front double biceps. Like most of these poses, it's going to be pretty apples and oranges. We have much better shape from Hassan, he's more round and has better insertions, but wasn't as sharp. And then we have Iain, who doesn't have that much roundness and doesn't have very good insertions just about on any body part, but packs a lot more raw, dense muscle and brought better conditioning. Now for this pose, this may be my most controversial opinion of the entire comparison, but I have Iain Valliere taking this pose. His wider shoulders and smaller waist provide him with his only saving grace in the shot, a half-decent X-frame. Hassan's midsection is also a bit too distracting for me in this pose, and really that's literally it. If Hassan's midsection was 2 inches tighter with slightly deeper abs, I'd probably give this pose to Hassan even with the worst conditioning. With that change alone, Hassan's X-frame would be crazy, and his waist would be Iain's, and his overall X-frame would be Iain's, but that's simply not the case. Also, I do want to point out that Hassan was unable to fully open up on his left side. It's probably just a mobility issue, and I am nitpicking, but once I noticed that, I couldn't unsee it. Otherwise though, I do think Hassan has a great set of arms, it's just that other areas, including his waist, overshadow them in a bad way. And I don't think Iain is outright smoking Hassan, I think he just does a little bit more, because let's get it straight, Iain's front double pose isn't the cleanest and it isn't the prettiest. Mainly, he's cutting a better outline and he has much better separation and conditioning than Hassan. Now for the front lat spread, this is a very easy Iain win, and perhaps the only one we can all unanimously agree on. Hassan is narrow and has a wider waist and a rounder stomach, and all those are on full display here. Due to his narrowness, he can't open up his lats that much, and he's pretty underwhelming in terms of creating the X-frame that we look for in this shot. Iain has a much better X-frame and outline. His quads are also pretty large, which provide the finishing touch to his X-frame due to his pretty good sweeps. And unlike some other showings, they were pretty separated as long as he kept them flexed properly. Iain's lats are also clearly better. He can lend a little bit of his flair to his smaller waist and wider shoulders, but from the front, his lats are still very, very good, despite what we may see when we get to the rear shots. Finally, Iain has much more detail throughout the chest and shoulders. I actually feel this may be Hassan's worst pose and highlights all of his flaws, where for Iain it's actually the opposite. This highlights Hassan's narrowness and his thicker waist, while for Iain it actually highlights his pretty much only saving grace, his X-frame. All in all, Iain is bringing a much better silhouette and more detail from top to bottom and clearly wins this pose. Now for the side chest pose, I feel Hassan clearly wins here, and instead of highlighting all of his flaws, the side chest perfectly suits all of his strengths. Hassan has the roundness, the pop, and that thickness from the side that makes a good side chest pose. He can also downplay his waist in this shot, and his conditioning isn't as important in this pose as in others. Hassan's arms and delts are 3D and are much better than Iain's, which surprisingly weren't as defined, and they were never going to match Hassan's in terms of roundness. Even Hassan's midsection is better than Iain's, as he's keeping it flexed and is well aware it can protrude a little, and he's doing his very best to avoid that, all while bringing out some impressive detail in the obliques. And as for the namesake of the pose, the chest, Hassan is beating Iain there too. Iain's chest did not look good at the show, let's get that straight. He's always had flat pecs, yes, and it's always been a weak point for him, but now in some shots his pecs look straight up like he's suffered a couple injuries. Mainly like he's torn some fibers at the insertion point of his chest along his sternum. That's exactly what it looks like to me, but Iain said in a video video on his Instagram that he is not aware of any injuries, but didn't quite rule out any small ones that might have gone unnoticed to him. With all that said, Hassan clearly wins in the chest department with a good amount of detail, but overall much fuller and rounder pecs. The only area I'd give to Iain is the side leg. Ian's conditioning was much better overall, so I'm not that surprised, and he's got plenty of lines and clear separation between the glute, ham, and quad. Honestly though, Hassan's side leg isn't that bad, it's just that the glutes were a little soggy. He still brings some great lines in the hams. I'm giving the side chest pose to Hassan easily though. Like I said, this pose is the inverse of the front lat. That pose exposed all of Hassan's strengths and highlighted Ian's weaknesses, but the side chest is much better suited for Hassan. Now moving on to the rear double, I'm sure a lot of you were holding your breath when it came time for Iain to turn around. You'll recall at the Olympia how his back looked pretty poor and even atrophied, and that started the whole nerve damage rumor. But I think Iain was pretty improved here. Not only do I think he added a little bit of muscle to his back in terms of thickness, density, and even width, I think he also had better posing, which is probably a large part of why his back looked better. Now Iain has never had the best back, but I do think he does enough to win this pose. Iain's back is very thick and dense, and like I said, his posing was much better here, and it hit his shallow lower and mid back. While Iain does have decent thickness here, he doesn't have that clear separation like a Ronnie or Phil Heath. To be fair, while they do have some of the best backs of all time, I'm just using it as an example. Iain has a pretty thick and dense back, but he doesn't have that clear separation in between every single muscle group in his back. But he still has some other kind of details there, like some good amount of muscle fibers in the lower back and vascularity. He also has some decent width here, and definitely better than Hassan. Hassan is the most shallow here out of anywhere in his physique. He just needs everything in this back, more width and more density. Because even standing next to Iain, who doesn't have the best back, but even has a good amount of thickness, density, and even a little bit of width, Hassan is clearly getting outmatched here. Not to mention in terms of the lower body, Hassan's glutes and hamstrings just aren't as sharp as Iain's. Overall, Iain clearly wins both portions of the back pose, the upper and lower body, and that makes for a pretty convincing win here. Now for the other back pose, I actually had my eyes on Hassan initially. His lats insert super low and are very symmetrical, and he was fairly tight in the lower back, only having about 1 or 2 folds. He honestly does look like a bigger Franco Columbu, and they both have similar lat insertions. But Iain is still looking very thick and dense, just like he did in the back double, and is bringing way more detail than Hassan. Iain is definitely wider than Hassan, which I guess we should have expected because Iain is just wider to begin with, and he still is winning the lower body, even though Hassan may be squeezing out a little bit more detail in this pose compared to the back double. But for Iain, with the better lower body, with the better density, with the more amount of details, like in the lower back where we can see it's brimming with muscle fibers, this is clearly his pose. I think this may be slightly closer than the back double, but it's still pretty decisive for Iain. Now for these next 2 poses, I will not be using the official NPC News Online photos. For whatever reason, for the top 2 call out with Hassan and Iain, they straight up don't have photos for the first few poses, and even for these next poses, didn't really capture the little variation the athletes did in the poses, and I just feel that these pictures overall paint a better picture. Anyway, Iain may have swept the back poses, but in this pose, the side tricep is a clear victory for Hassan. I know some people really like Iain in this shot, and I kind of get that, and Iain is pretty fond of how he hits this shot himself. His execution in this pose is top notch. You can tell it's practiced, and it's done very, very well. I also like how he hits it with the staggered foot stance like Dorian Yates, instead of just reusing the side chest stance like everyone does nowadays. With this execution, he really highlights his small waist and oblique detail, and really shows off his big and separated side leg. However, do I even have to mention it? Iain's tricep is almost non-existent. In fact, I think this is the best I've ever seen it. In previous showings, it would hardly be visible. It's very hard to award the pose to him when he is completely missing the namesake of the pose. But take a look back at Hassan. It's easy to see why I think he wins this pose. I love his execution too. It's somewhere in between the full rotation forward like a Sean Roden might have done, and a traditional sideways facing side tri. A lot of people turn to the front to downplay their triceps and highlight the quads and the abs, but Hassan does have a great set of tris and arms in general, so he's not fully rotating head on. So we get a bit of everything. We get to see his big round arms and triceps, which are clearly better than Iain's, but we also see Hassan's huge quads, and even his abs and waist look pretty tight here. I really like Iain's execution, but Hassan has a great execution too, and all the necessary components. In the abs and thighs, I started by looking at Iain, and I thought it wasn't too bad. Pretty good obliques, and a pretty good amount of quad separation. He does have everything you'd expect for a good abs and thigh pose. His quads are big, and he was more conditioned than Hassan. But Hassan, quite frankly, just beats Iain at his own game here. More symmetrical abs and obliques, and a more symmetrical chest, and a rounder, fuller far pec. And for the thighs portion of this pose, Iain does have huge quads, with some great separation this time around, but Hassan's quads have always been absolutely crazy. Due to the roundness in Hassan's quads, they look bigger than Iain's, and they may just straight up up actually be bigger than Iain's, and they have more of a natural sweep to them. And surprisingly, Hassan has a good amount of sweep and separation in his legs despite Iain beating him in overall condition. So basically, Hassan is just doing everything better. Simple as that. I'm going to give this pose to Hassan. I prefer his version of the shot, and I prefer his abs, and definitely prefer his quads as well. Now to our last pose, the most muscular, and here I have a clear Hassan victory. Again, this is a pose that works better for Hassan, someone with great muscle bellies and good roundness. Now this pose could have worked for Iain based on detail. I completely understand why someone could have Iain ahead here, because yes, he's by far more conditioned and has a lot more detail, but there are way too many unsavory things happening in Iain's physique for this pose to be his. The chest is on full display, and yeah, it doesn't look good. You can really see the weird thing going on with his pecs, whatever it may be. And it's not just his deformed chest. Iain's abs from a head-on view just aren't that good. They aren't that symmetrical. He honestly probably should have gone with another pose altogether because this ain't it. But even with his regular hands clasped pose, it's being completely marred by his misshapen chest, and Hassan brings in another great variation with his crab pose. In fact, I think Iain with his hands clasped arguably wins, but overall I still like Hassan's rounder look, and he's getting a little bit more detail in the crab pose versus his own hands clasped. The most muscular can really favor short guys if they fill out their frames, and that's exactly the case for Hassan. Hassan has the whole compact physique thing going on. Shorter, but full and round. And when you look at him, you just have to ask, is it even possible for a guy to add more muscle? And although he may not be the most conditioned, he is wringing out a fair amount of detail in both of his shots, especially the crab. He's got a good amount of detail in the chest, shoulders, and quads. So really to end the comparison, I have to have Hassan winning the most muscular pose overall. But if you just saw Iain's hands clasped pose, I suppose I could see a convincing argument for his victory overall in the shot. But for that first pose, that ain't it. And both of Hassan's poses were pretty good. So at least for now, I'm going with Hassan to round out this comparison. Well, for those of you keeping score, and probably just most of you in general, given the closeness of the comparison in my own eyes, the score came out to a dead tie. 12 points to 12 points. I kind of expected this. These guys have apples and oranges physiques, like I said in the beginning. To be fair, I could see a pose or two going in the other athlete's favor, which definitely would have changed the score. I know a lot of people were outraged that Hassan lost, and a lot of them said that he was just straight up robbed. And I can honestly see where they're coming from. But that doesn't mean I don't think Iain should have won. In fact, I did have Iain winning, and I thought he deserved it, but we can't ignore the facts. One, the judging criteria is all over the place. Is conditioning weighed more or not? I saw a lot of people commenting that. And two, a perfect score was not deserved, which is what Iain got. I hate saying what people do and do not deserve, but come on. Every fan on the internet was divided, people in the audience were divided, the entire comparison resulted in a tie. We can all agree at minimum, this was somewhat close, and giving Iain a perfect score is laughable. Overall, I get it. I see where people are upset, and I see why they think Hassan was robbed. The judging criteria and lack of transparency have failed the fans again, and Iain doesn't have the prettiest or the best physique. And like I said, I was fine with Iain winning, but I simply can't ignore the fact of the matter that plenty of people had solid opinions that said otherwise. And honestly, if Hassan won, I would have not batted one singular eye. These are both Olympia caliber guys that both deserve to be on the Olympia stage come later this year. I definitely want to know what you guys think though. I know this is going to be a hot button issue, so go ahead and leave me a comment down in the comment section. Let me know who you had winning this comparison, let me know what you think of my thoughts, and let me know why you had that person winning the comparison. That's going to do it for me though, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more bodybuilding content. And I'll see you guys in the next video.